Kerry, you also talk about a timeline war, and also an aspect that I have seen very clearly is about the so-called artificial matrix, the masters of the artificial matrix that you talk about as well. And also I have seen that. And there the sun played a very big role too. Could you say something more about that?
Absolutely. So I'll start with the architects of the false matrix, because it's important to, if we want to understand timeline wars and we want to understand the nature of the false matrix, we must understand who set this up and why. So I'm going to go quite far back now so that we're looking at a broad overview of reality and of creation in order to allow everything to come home and make sense. God is an infinite, all-knowing thing. And you know what? My son asked me many years ago, he said, "Mom, who created God?" And I said, "Nobody created God, my love, because God is outside of creation. God always existed. Creation was something special that God undertook. And whatever word, you know, some people will refer to God as source or creator consciousness. So I encourage everybody to use whatever word. I'm never hung up on words. Please use whatever word resonates with you. But for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to refer to God as the supreme creator of all that is. Now, this supreme creator of all that is came to a point of realization, and the realization was, I am everything and I know everything. What else is there? What is there beyond me? And that question, because God is an all creative being, that question began to spur creation as we know it into motion. Because the question was, how can I grow? How can I be more than I already am? And I am everything. So it's almost like an impossible question. And the answer was, if I separate myself into different aspects of my own self, and I'm going to give you a funny analogy so that everybody understands this. It's almost like having a cake, right? You got a chocolate cake and you say, this is the best chocolate cake I've ever had in my whole life. And then you break that chocolate cake down into its raw ingredients. There's the eggs, there's the flour, there's the sugar. Now what you've got are the raw ingredients to make the cake. So that's essentially what happened. God, source, creator consciousness separated itself into its own various components so that these various components or aspects of God could individuate from God, separate from God, and have an individual experience. That's the beginning of creation. Yeah. And now that we understand that, we understand, okay, there at the beginning of creation, there was dark and there was light, because both of these are amalgamated into one light that is God. But in the breaking down of God into its own separate components, dark and light became individual separate things. And it was perfect. Darkness wasn't bad and light wasn't good. These were just aspects of God in creation. But in time, the darkness became corrupted. Yeah. In time, the darkness began to become what we would call completely deranged, psychopathic, to the point that that darkness began to experience itself as superior to God, its own creator. And it began to say such perverse things such as, I want to be bigger than God, better than God, and eradicate God and be the only God. And we've seen narratives like that interwoven into many religious texts where we have a jealous God and where we have a God who wants to be the only one that is worshipped. This is the story of the architects of the false matrix. Yeah. These architects, many people say, well, who are they? What are their names? They go by many names, and there are many of them, because like light, darkness has many layers, many factions. So we can call them the archons, we can call them the Anunnaki, who are underneath the archons. The archons are an overall intelligence, and underneath these archonic beings are many different groups, all operating towards the same goal, which is to separate themselves from God.
Yeah.
But there's one snag to that. When we push God away and we separate ourselves from God, we reject God. What happens is we reject our own capacity for light and therefore our own capacity to create.
Yeah.
So now we've got a heap of depraved, dysfunctional beings of darkness, and they can't create, but they need somewhere to go. They need a universe now. So they thought, well, we've got to fashion somehow a universe to live in. We don't want to be part of the organic universe. This was the birth of the false matrix. These dark beings, because they cannot create, they can only manipulate and they can engineer.
Yeah.
And those were the two tools that they used to manipulate and to engineer this construct of artificial reality that we find ourselves in.
Mm-hmm.
But then they needed a populace upon the planets, and I say that with a plural because Earth is not the only false matrix. There are many false matrices. We, by the way, are a central hub within the false matrix. And because we are a central hub within the false matrix, if Earth goes down, the whole false matrix goes with it. That's why this is so important.
Yeah.
So what we have is these depraved beings now needing a populace. And what they did is they, for want of a better word, they advertised it to the beings of light by saying, do you guys want to come and play in our playground? Because that's really what a matrix is. A matrix isn't bad or good, light or dark. A matrix is simply a reality field wherein we go to have experiences. So the false matrix is the place that we are in now, but equally there is an organic matrix. That's the place that we all originated from. These exquisite dark beings enticed so many exquisite light beings over by saying, come and play. You can leave at any time. When you say you've had enough, you go.
Yeah.
And we said, oh, that sounds like fun. Let's go and explore that. We didn't realize that we were going to forget so deeply and so completely, and the amnesia and the separation from our own divinity was going to appear so real to us that we weren't going to even be able to ask the question, can I leave now? We weren't even going to remember that we had a choice. Thus, we became captured here. And the longer we were captured here, the more we accrued a thing that we call karma and karmic debt, the more we became enslaved to the depravity of the false matrix, the more we normalized the depravity of the false matrix.
Yeah.
So we began to see this as the way the world works. This is normal. We all fight each other. We go to war with each other. We badmouth each other. This is normal. It's not normal. It's the programming and the imprinting of the false matrix upon our very divine essence. So I've explained to you one group of people who came into the false matrix. They were those who were, I want to call it false advertising, enticed by false advertising to come into the false matrix. But then there was another group of people who said, uh-oh, we've got a problem. We've got a problem. We call these people the star seeds. They looked at what was going on and they said, we've got to go in to the inside of the false matrix to collapse that thing. Because if we don't, it's going to keep harvesting souls. It is going to keep trapping souls that cannot be freed, that cannot get out. So the star seeds came in with a mission to free the people that were stuck on the planet from their enslavement. And that's how the false matrix gained a population. And it needed that population because the population was going to uphold the false matrix and create on behalf of the darkness, on behalf of those dark overlords. And that's exactly what has occurred. We find ourselves now in this place of understanding. We're at the beginning of understanding, okay, something's wrong with life. It's not meant to be this way, but we don't yet remember how it is meant to be. That's what we're in the process of rediscovering. The only way we're going to rediscover that is to rediscover ourselves. So this is really an inner journey. At this point in our evolution, it's an inner journey for every single soul. But that's the architects of the false matrix. They are putting out all the stops to keep the control of the false matrix, to prevent a very inevitable collapse. Because what they understand is, if the false matrix collapses, their food source goes with it, meaning their fuel source. They are energetically sustained by us, by our energy. We, in a sense, feed them, which is why human beings are walking around going, I'm so tired. I'm so exhausted. I don't know why I feel this way. I can't carry on. Some people are so desperate that they say things like, I just want to get off this planet. I just want to leave. I can't bear it here anymore, because they are so taxed, literally, at the energetic level, just for being alive. And there's something at the soul level that's now calling our individual energy back to ourselves. That's why we understand, whoa, something's wrong. But many people can't yet put their finger on the button and say, this is the problem. This is what was always out of place. We were living in an artificial matrix, a false matrix.
Wow, Kerry. I have a story about that sums it up very nicely, I guess, as an essence. When I wrote the book, The Betrayed Heaven, Return to Eden, I explored the question of how evil or bad came into the world. And there I wrote a lot about the archons, jinn, or whatever you call them, the entities that you were also just talking about. When I published the book, I had such, I say, problems. Situations started popping up that were very, very creepy. It started to spook. There were, I say, a lot of very strange, scary things happening in my life. But the most important thing was, 3 or 4 months after the book was published, I had an encounter with an archon. I was sitting in the car, driving along on the way to Vienna, 2 hours away by car, and I was talking to myself and talking about the archons. And suddenly I noticed that on my back seat an energy spread into the whole driver's compartment, where I felt there sits an archon now. And I got at the same time fear and also a goose skin, and nevertheless also a certain security. And I began to speak in a different voice than I do now, and I said, and in the end, you will realize that you did not create yourselves. You yourselves are trapped in a world from which you can be redeemed. And that is why the chance that we all have now is also possible for you to awaken and be redeemed. You are not gods yourselves. You are not all creators. And then the energy changed immediately, and it also stopped spooking. I try to keep that story to myself because I couldn't prove it, but it fits in very nicely.
But it's perfect at understanding our power. And that's what people need to remember, is that in the presence of darkness, we must remember who we are. Because the role of darkness originally was to catalyze light. That's exactly what the role of darkness was. When we're in hardship, we grow. So darkness was only ever there to catalyze the light. And the light needed to learn from the darkness how to be more true and more whole. In other words, to integrate more of that darkness. You see, we can talk about how darkness rejected light, but do you understand? Light did the same thing. Light also rejected darkness. Light also looked at darkness with judgment and said, you're bad, you're wrong. But what you did in the car that day is exactly what each human being must do, which is to speak as an equal, not superior, not inferior, but to simply be in your power and say, one day you're going to get this. And in that moment, you weren't in fear. In that moment, you were in power. That is a magnificent story to explain what we're actually here to do. And it helps us to understand that in truth, darkness does not have power over us. It is our own power being used against us. But we're here to take that back. And when we do, darkness is rendered absolutely powerless. That's what you did in the car. You rendered darkness powerless. It didn't have control to be the big, scary monster anymore.
Kerry, I have to take a deep breath again, because these are simply unbelievable things. I think the viewers will feel the same way.
Thank you.
Kerry, what I would also like to tell you, and many of my viewers or our viewers already know this, that I like to talk about cosmic orchestrated orders. By this, I mean, so to speak, that the physical conditions, also the energies, for example, through very specific frequencies, enable us to facilitate this process of awakening, which presupposes that we are also ready for it and go out of fear and go into inner peace. Can you do something with it if I tell it like this?
I love the word cosmic orchestration because it allows people to understand exactly what this is. Humanity feels forgotten. Humanity feels alone. Humanity feels abandoned. Humanity feels rejected by God, as in kicked out of the nest, almost like God, and no, this is not what people will think in linear terms, but this is a deep-seated core wounding that we all carry, and that is, God's left me here, and therefore I must be bad. Because why would God leave me here if I wasn't bad? So I've been rejected by God. He's kicked me out of the nest, and I'm here fending for myself.
Yeah.
This is the greatest illusion that there could ever be. It's the illusion that we are here on our own. The illusion that we're here unsupported. One day, each and every single one of us is going to see the world as it was always. We can't see that yet because we were born to the false matrix, which means we're very conditioned to perceive only this matrix, only this light spectrum, to pick up only these frequencies and nothing beyond it. So to us, nothing exists beyond this. To us, that cosmic orchestration is a fantasy. But one day we will get to see that cosmic orchestration with our heart and with our eyes.
Yeah.
And it will bring us to our knees. We will weep and we will be humbled as we understand, my God, how protected was I? How loved was I? How guided was I? How mistaken was I to think that I was ever abandoned, rejected, cast aside, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
That reconnection, this is important now, that reconnection with divinity is the remedy that every human being needs right now. Every human being alive needs the remedy of reconnection to themselves, to their divinity. And the false matrix knows that. The false matrix knows that that's the remedy. And because the false matrix knows that's the remedy, that's what's going to facilitate our eyes being opened to the cosmic orchestration. The false matrix then puts in all those stops that I spoke about earlier to prevent connection from happening. So we become obsessed with social media, we become obsessed with our phones, we become obsessed with everyone out there. What are they doing? What are they thinking? We become obsessed with politics or with pollution or with a narrative outside of ourselves. And furthermore, we become so separate from our heart because we land up in the conditioning of imagining that we're only a brain. So our whole personality, we think of it as something that stems from the brain instead of the being. And then when we are the being, then we realize, oh, the brain is only a part of me, but not the totality of me. So the brain is incredibly important, but it's not the seat of the soul. It's not the core identity. The heart, by the way, is also not the core identity. What the heart is an access point to your core identity. That's why we always speak about the heart being so important, because it's the doorway that leads you to the totality of you. But nonetheless, all of this boils down to that one thing: connection. And you know what many people say when I tell them, for example, come do a meditation with me, come do a process with me, come sit in stillness with me. What most people will say is, oh, I can't do that. My mind won't let me. My thoughts are too busy. And what they're saying is, I'm so disconnected, I don't know how to reconnect, and I'm actually scared. I'm actually scared of reconnecting because I don't know what I'm going to find. And as soon as we realize, oh, we don't get to go forward, we don't get to evolve, we don't get to progress beyond where we are until that connection is in place. It's a holy connection. It's a sacred connection. And it is what opens our eyes up to the cosmic orchestration. And when we feel the cosmic orchestration, at that point, we feel for the first time reinforced, for the first time supported. And imagine what life will be like for everybody listening. Imagine what life will be like when you walk through your world knowing, not hoping, knowing, no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. No matter how this unfolds in my life, I'm guided. No matter what tomorrow holds, everything's going to work out. Imagine walking around with that absolute knowing. What most people have is something called faith, which is really hope in disguise. And I'm not saying that faith is a bad thing. I too have faith, but there must be something beyond faith. There must be an experience. That's what connection is. Connection is not an intellectual undertaking. It is an experience of your own divinity.
Again, take a deep breath. Kerry, I try to make this clear to viewers and my readers again and again, where I am also affected myself, to pursue the question or to answer it. What can I do now for the moment when it all starts? I want to ascend. I want to be redeemed. I want to get out of the artificial matrix. What can I do? And for this, I basically tell the same thing over and over again. And I also call on myself again and again and say, it's like love. Love in itself is not to be understood or portrayed, but it is simply to get involved in the state of love. The highest vibration in the cosmos is the state of love. But when we are in the state of fear or anxiety, stress, and so on, the greatest challenge at the moment, the power play of the preventers, is that which is basically already so obvious, docks onto us right now, what touches us, and what is there. We don't have to create that. We just need to accept it, this gift of God, the state of love, and thereby realize who we really are. And then we are also ready at the same time, and not only ready, but have made the ultimate decision that leads us really to awaken, really to ascend.
I fully agree, and I will add to that with the following. Dieter, you asked me earlier about the timeline wars and the architects of the false matrix. And I spoke in detail about the architects of the false matrix, but I didn't go too deeply into the timeline wars. But I'd like to just bring that in now as I share what I'm about to say. And that is, the timeline wars were, quite simply put, the attempt of the darkness to keep control over us and our consciousness. That's the most simplistic way that I can explain to you what the timeline wars were about. But as soon as we understand that when we start leading ourselves, we start leading the timeline. Instead of being led by the timeline, instead of being manipulated by the timeline, when we start leading ourselves, we find so much occurs. And the best way that we can do that is to, as I was talking about earlier, to connect with our divinity. And what that entails, to be more precise, is to learn how to really be with ourselves. And isn't it crazy? Isn't it mad that we should even learn how to be with ourselves? Because this should be automatic. We would think, I know how to be with me, but most people don't. Most people don't know how to be with themselves because they don't know who they are beyond the chatterbox brain. Finding, for example, meditations or practices whereby you can enter into supreme stillness. If you can learn to be with yourself in this way, something profound happens, and that is integration. Integration matters and is really important, and I would describe integration the following way. We always look at the food that we eat. You know, I love analogies, right? When I speak, I always like to give pictures and analogies. When we eat food, we become very obsessed with what we eat. We become very obsessed with eating this much calories, or only this diet, or not this, or only that, whatever it is. We become obsessed with the input. But we forget that the most important part is digestion. Digestion. Yeah. It's not what you put in your mouth that matters as much as your body's ability to do something with what you've eaten. That's the digestion is the equivalent of integration. If we understand what digestion is, it's the most important part of nourishing the body. Yeah. Because you can put in the perfect, I was going to say the perfect diet, but who knows if there is such a thing. Let's just assume there is. You could put in the perfect diet, but if you can't digest it, it means nothing. Yeah. So with your spiritual practice, for everybody listening, it must become digestible. In other words, you must create space for integration. And when you create space for integration, let me please tell you about the magic that's going to unfold. Right now, my God, we live at an amazing time. We are literally living inside a miracle right now, and most people don't have the eyes to see it. If we do have the eyes to see it, what we're going to start realizing is the work is being done for me. It's not hard. To ascend is not hard. It's natural. It is simply following the cues that the universe has already put in place for me, which is the collapse of all these timelines. That's what I spoke about in the beginning. So timeline wars was to keep us separate from each other, and more importantly, separate from ourselves. Yeah. As the collapse occurs, everything comes home. Here, into the heart, into the body, into the being. This means you don't have to work really hard to reintegrate all the fragments of you. You don't have to work really hard. You only have to receive, be in presence, and allow it to happen. That's what integration is. Yes. Integration occurs when you let yourself come into that supreme stillness and accept the many rich blessings that the universe has offered you, and allow for your body to take over, because it actually knows what to do. In the same way that your body knows how to digest, your brain can't interject and tell your body, okay, now you've got to take that nutrient, and now you've got to do this, and then you've got to do that. The body knows what it's doing. Equally with ascension, the body knows what it's doing. And many human beings say, oh, that's scary because that means I'm not in control. Yes, you're not in control. But what you are is in power, which is much better than being in control. You are in power when you can create that space to integrate the healing that is literally taking place in the air around you right now.